Have betrayed me.
I serve only you.
Do the taste sympathetically. Do the temp. Automatic. Order.
There is no life in this body. You can't destroy me. Your eyes.
This was defeated.
Look what your God has done.
All right.
Hey guys, what's happening? Niyat here with Film Comics Explained, and as voted for by everyone in the latest poll, today we'll be exploring Bram Stoker's Dracula, the 1992 gothic horror directed by Francis Ford Coppola, based on the 1897 novel Dracula by Bram Stoker, which is arranged in epistolary format, told through diaries, letters, and telegrams written between the main characters. It goes without saying that Dracula is one of the most famous pieces of literature, with many of the characters simultaneously entering popular culture, and remaining there as archetypal versions of their characters. From the infamous Count Dracula, who's the quintessential vampire, to Abraham Van Helsing, the quintessential vampire hunter. Starring Gary Oldman as Count Dracula in a captivating performance that is matched by the gravitas of Anthony Hopkins as Professor Abraham Van Helsing, and including a supporting cast of Keanu Reeves as Jonathan Harker, Winona Ryder as Mina Murray, Richard E. Grant as Dr Jack Seward, Cary Elwes as Lord Arthur Holmwood, Tom Waits as R.M. Renfield, and Monica Belluci as one of Count Dracula's brides. It follows a group of friends connected by tragedy that must team up to halt Dracula's plan of taking over the world.
Mr. Morris, your bullets will not harm him. He must be beheaded. I suggest you use your big bowie knife.
Well, I wasn't planning on getting that close, Doc.
The film is for the most part an almost completely faithful rendition of Bram Stoker's classic. However, it does take certain liberties, like turning the evil warlord into a sympathetic romantic villain. Born on September 13, 1431, Count Dracula is a centuries-old vampire, sorcerer, and Transylvanian nobleman that ruled over his namesake palace and wanted to expand his realm. The film opens in the year 1462, giving us a detailed origin story that is only hinted at in the novel. Constantinople had fallen, and Muslim Turks swept into Europe with a vast superior force, striking at Romania and threatening all of Christendom. We're told from Transylvania arose a Romanian knight of the Sacred Order of the Dragon, known as Dracula. On the eve of the battle, his bride Elisabeta, whom he prized above all things, knew that he had to face an insurmountable force from which he might never return. The ferocious battle that followed was one for the ages. Bolstered by tenacity and indomitable will, Dracula's counter-offensive was a resounding success. Not only did he drive the Turks back, but as a warning to others, he impaled hundreds of them on long spears, earning him the title Vlad the Impaler. Seeking vengeance, the enemy sent a message to his castle, falsely claiming that the warlord had been killed in the fight, and heartbroken by this, Elisabeta flung herself into the river below, hoping to reunite with him in heaven. Unfortunately, when Dracula returned, a bishop explained that her soul was damned because she took her own life. Furious that God let his wife die while Dracula defended his church, and angry that he'd forsaken Elisabeta, Dracula renounces God and the church in front of the clergy. Drawing his sword, he stabs the large cross on the dais of his chapel. Drinking the blood that spilled forth, Dracula proclaimed he will be reborn with all the powers of darkness at his command, precipitating his fall.
Yes, she will be.
In the novel, Van Helsing claimed that he practiced the obscure field of scolomancy, a form of dark Romani magic from the Carpathian Mountains taught by the devil himself. Becoming a vampire, he then mastered sorcery and the art of necromancy, living for several centuries in his castle with 3 beautiful brides that lay entombed beside him. Unbeknownst to humanity, he spent the next 400 years engineering a cunning plan to conquer the world, which kicks the story into motion. We then head to March 1897 England to meet Renfield, Dracula's former solicitor, who's talking to someone in the shadows of the insane asylum, claiming that he'd done everything he asked of him and that all the preparations were in order. At the law firm of Hawkins and Tompkins the following morning, Mr. Hawkins is speaking with Renfield's replacement, law clerk Jonathan Harker, who must take his place and travel to Transylvania to close the sale of 10 London properties being purchased by Count Dracula.
This is a great opportunity for you, Harker. You'll have to leave Transylvania immediately. Opportunities such as this come but once in a lifetime.
Yes, sir. I will give it my full attention.
It's explained that upon his return, Jonathan and his fiancée Mina Murray intend to be married. Too bad Mina is the spitting image of Elisabetta. And so Jonathan sets off to meet the Count on the borders of Transylvania, Moldavia, and Bukovina, in the midst of the Carpathian Mountains, said to be one of the wildest and least known portions of Europe. After taking a coach to the Borgo Pass to await the arrival of Dracula's carriage, as the Count had instructed, Jonathan disembarks and tells the driver there early, and that no one is there. One of the fellow passengers then hands him a crucifix and explains that the dead travel fast, before the coach speeds away as wolves begin to close in on him. Dracula's carriage then suddenly appears, and a driver in weird dragon armor beckons Harker to enter and sit down. Obliging, Jonathan comes inside and is sped off towards Dracula's castle, passing through a circle of blue fire at the entrance.
Welcome to my home. Enter freely of your own will and leave some of the happiness you bring.
Inviting Harker inside, Dracula then humbly offers to feed him dinner, but excuses himself, claiming that he'd already dined and that he never drinks wine. As Jonathan eats, he points to a portrait on the wall and tells Dracula that he resembles his ancestor. Not expecting the comment, Dracula explains the Order of the Dracul, the Dragon, were an ancient society pledging his forefathers to defend the church against all enemies of Christ, and that the relationship was not entirely successful. Not realizing the context, Harker continues eating and snickers, only to have Dracula angrily grab his sword and point the tip towards John in a very threatening way. The Count exclaims that it was no laughing matter, and that the Draculs have a right to be proud. He continues by explaining there was never a devil or witch so great as Attila, whose blood flows in his veins, and that he was the last of his kind. Realizing he'd offended the Count, Jonathan stands up and begs forgiveness, which the Count accepts.
Your firm writes most highly of your talents. They say you are a man of good taste.
You may rely on me, Count.
When they begin tending to business, Harker drafts a contract for the 10 properties the Count is purchasing, as Dracula ominously tells him that he longed to go through the crowded streets of London to share its life, its changes, and its deaths. Unfortunately, when Harker congratulates him on the official purchase, the Count picks up a photo of Mina and asks if he believed in destiny, that even the powers of time can be ordered to a single purpose. When Jonathan explains that he planned on getting married to Mina as soon as he returned and asks if the Count was ever married, Dracula tells him that he was married ages ago and that she died. Taking advantage of Harker's sympathy, the Count then forcefully proposes a change of plans.
Stay with me until a month from now.
A month? Do you wish me to stay so long?
I will take no refusal.
In Jonathan's absence, Mina goes to stay with her wealthy friend Lucy Westenra, who has just received 3 marriage proposals from Texan Quincy Morris, Dr Jack Seward, and Lord Arthur Holmwood. As Mina goes over what she'll be writing to Jonathan about her experiences with Lucy, the malignant supernatural force of Dracula begins swaying its influence over her.
R.M. Renfield returns from Transylvania, promptly suffers a complete mental breakdown. He's now obsessed with some bloodlust.
Dr. Seward himself is overseeing the rehabilitation of Renfield, who's now compelled himself to eat insects, spiders, birds, and other creatures in ascending order of size to absorb their life force. Unbeknownst to the Doctor, Renfield is Dracula's thrall, a servant hoping to be repaid with immortality.
The diet, Mr. Renfield, is disgusting.
Actually, they're perfectly nutritious. You see, it's life that I ingest. Gives back life to me. I need life for the Master.
What master?
The Master will come, and he has promised to make me immortal.
Back at the castle, Jonathan writes in his journal that he's thinking strange things that he dare not confess to his soul, and that the way the Count looked at Mina's picture filled him with dread and horrible purpose. As he begins shaving, the hand of Dracula touches him on the shoulder, causing him to cut himself, but when he looks back, the Count is actually several feet away. Telling him to be careful, Dracula breaks the mirror as he approaches and takes the razor, tasting the blood when Jonathan isn't looking. He then menacingly begins shaving him and explains that he should never venture to sleep in any other part of the castle, warning it is old and has many bad memories. Dracula then spots the crucifix around Harker's neck and snarls before backing away in disgust.
Do not put your faith in such trinkets of deceit. Transylvania is not England, and to you there shall be many strange things.
Much to poor Jonathan's horror, Dracula leaves the room and is then seen crawling down the castle like a lizard. It's here that Jonathan realizes he's in grave danger. Not only is he a prisoner in the castle, with many of the doors locked to him, including the way out, but Dracula instructed him to write 3 letters, one to the firm, one to his family, and another to Mina, all spaced out over a few days to make it look like he was already on his way back. Called into an unused bedchamber by the sweet siren-like calls of Dracula's 3 brides, he's seduced and drained of much of his blood. Furious that his brides had gone against his wishes, Dracula throws them off him and gives them a child to feast on instead, causing Jonathan to freak out. Waking up, Jonathan writes another entry into his journal, explaining the letters had sealed his doom. He also notes gypsies have been filling boxes with earth from the bowels of the castle that are to be delivered to the Count's newly acquired Carfax Abbey in London.
Dearest Mina, all is well here. The Count has insisted I remain for a month to tutor him in English custom. I can say no more, except I love you.
Back at Hellingham Estate, Lucy tells Mina that she's accepted Arthur's proposal and will be marrying soon. Of course, Count Dracula is on his way to London with malicious intent, keen on disrupting the marital plans of all. On board the Demeter, which is making its way from Transylvania to London, the brave captain begins writing a log detailing how they were losing a crewmate every few days to some mysterious thing. What they don't realize is that Dracula is feeding on the poor souls, becoming younger and more powerful until only the captain is left. In the novel, we learn that after his crew had all perished, the captain tied himself to the helm and kept the log on him, hoping that when the Demeter drifted into London, someone would go over his account and piece together what happened. Unfortunately for the world, having now gained his full might, when the Demeter approaches the shore, Dracula turns into a wolf and stalks the entranced Lucy, feeding on her in an orgy of pleasure. While Jonathan eventually escapes the clutches of the brides and makes it to a church to be taken care of by nuns, Top V begins his pursuit of Mina, explaining he was a lost prince, no doubt hoping to make her his bride. Though she initially rebuffs him with a swift confidence, using his wit and cunning, he eventually persuades her that he's a worthy suitor by unlocking hidden memories of Elizabeta within her. Noticing that something was odd about his fiancée, Arthur calls on his friend Dr. Seward to visit her. While initially saying that there was nothing wrong, Lucy admits that she's changing and that she was able to hear everything. Giving her medication to calm down, Seward then speaks with both Arthur and Quincy, explaining that he was confounded, unable to figure out what was wrong.
How very droll. Do you hear that, Quince? Last week he wanted to marry her. Now he wants to have her committed.
When the trio enter the room and see that she was in a wild state, Seward explains he's taken the liberty of calling Abraham Van Helsing, a metaphysician philosopher that is his teacher and good friend. Though playfully dismissive at first, when Arthur realizes the severity of her condition, he thanks him for his quick thinking.
Do it, man. Bring him here. Spare no expense.
In the novel, Professor Abraham Van Helsing is an aged Dutch doctor with a wide range of interests, accomplishments, experience, education, and expertise. It's explained that Van Helsing had a son who died, and that his wife went insane after their son's death, but as a devout Catholic, he refused to divorce her. He also explained that his boy, had he lived, would have had a similar appearance to Arthur Holmwood. Because of this, Van Helsing developed a particular fondness of Holmwood, but in truth, he's an extremely lovable character that calls all with good in their heart friend. It's explained that Van Helsing suffered a grievous wound, and Seward saved his life by sucking out the gangrene. Indebted to him, he arrives with haste to help them. And lucky he did, with Dracula also arriving at the same time to feed on Lucy once again.
My God. There's no time to be lost. Must be a transfusion at once.
It is Van Helsing who first realizes that Lucy is the victim of a vampire, and he guides the men on how to save her. First by getting each of them to give their blood to her in transfusions that would replace the blood that Dracula had taken, before finally explaining what they were up against.
Something just went up there, sucked it out of her, and flew away, I suppose?
Yeah, why not?
Those marks near dear Miss Lucy's neck were made by something unspeakable out there. Dead, but not dead. To live, it feeds on Lucy's precious blood. It is a beast, a monster.
Meanwhile, after reading a letter from the Sisters of the Blessed Sacrament in Romania, saying that Jonathan believed Mina was in danger, and that she should join him at the nunnery so they could get married, Mina immediately leaves. She also writes to Dracula, saying that she would be leaving him to marry Jonathan. Just as Van Helsing realizes the enemy they were pursuing was Dracula, the undead foe he's been hunting all his life, furious by Mina's betrayal, Dracula then feeds on Lucy and condemns her to living death. And so Lucy seemingly dies and a service is held for her the following day, where Van Helsing explains he wants to cut off her head and take out the heart to be sure, much to Dr. Seward's disgust. Despite their apprehension, the three suitors join Van Helsing to her crypt that night, where he explains she's undead and is now a being beyond the grace of God, a wanderer in the outer darkness.
She's vampire, Nosferatu. So, my friends, we fight not one beast, but legions that go on age after age after age, feeding on the blood of the living.
And lo, just as he'd feared, Lucy appears with a child she was hoping to feed on. Saving the kid, Van Helsing uses a crucifix to make her recoil back into the coffin, before instructing Arthur to strike her heart with a stake. As he does so, Van Helsing then cuts off Lucy's head before meeting with the newly married Jonathan and Mina to learn more about their experiences with Dracula. Getting the entire group together, the vampire hunter then goes over all of their notes. An excerpt from Mina Harker's journal has Van Helsing describing the Nosferatu and who he thinks Dracula really is. His conclusions are based on observed data gathered from the journals and correspondence between the group. Their diligent note-taking and his amazing deductive reasoning ultimately convince everyone of how they should go about ending Dracula and avenging the death of Lucy. There are such beings as vampires. Some of us have evidence that they exist. Even had we not the proof of our own unhappy experience, the teachings and the records of the past give proof enough for the sane peoples. The Nosferatu do not die like the bee when he stings once. He is only stronger, and being stronger, have yet more power to work evil. This vampire which is amongst us is of himself so strong in person as 20 men. He is of cunning more than mortal, for his cunning be the growth of ages. He has still the aids of necromancy, which is, as his etymology imply, the divination by the dead, and all the dead that he can come nigh to are for him at command. He is brute and more than brute, he is devil and callous, and the heart of him is not. He can, within his range, direct the elements, the storm, the fog, the thunder. He can command all the meaner things, the rat and the owl, and the bat, the moth, and the fox, and the wolf. He can grow and become small, and he can at times vanish and come unknown. How then are we to begin our strike to destroy him? How shall we find his where? And having found it, how can we destroy? My friends, this is much. It is a terrible task that we undertake, and there may be consequence to make the brave shudder. For if we fail in this our fight, he must surely win, and then where end we? But to fail here is not mere life or death. It is that we become as him, that we henceforward become foul things of the night like him, without heart or conscience, preying on the bodies and the souls of those we love best. So far, then, we have all we may act upon, and let me tell you that very much of the beliefs are justified by what we have seen in our own so unhappy experience. The vampire live on, and cannot die by mere passing of the time. He can flourish when that he can fatten on the blood of the living. Even more, we have seen amongst us that he can even grow younger, that his vital faculties grow strenuous, and seem as though they refresh themselves when his special pabulum is plenty. But he cannot flourish without this diet. He eat not as others. Even friend Jonathan, who lived with him for weeks, did never see him eat. Never. He throws no shadow. He make in the mirror no reflect, as again Jonathan observe. He has the strength of many of his hands. Witness again Jonathan, when he shut the door against the wolves, and when he helped him from the diligence too. He can transform himself to wolf, as we gather from the ship arrival in Whitby, where he tear open the dog. He can be as bad as Madam Mina saw him on the window at Whitby, and as friend John saw him fly from this so near house, and as my friend Quincy saw him at the window of Miss Lucy. He can come in the mist which he create. The noble ship's captain proved him of this. But from what we know, the distance he can make this mist is limited, and it can only be round himself. He come on moonlight rays as elemental dust, as again Jonathan saw those sisters in the castle of Dracula. He becomes so small, we ourselves saw Miss Lucy, ere she was at peace, slip through a hairbreadth space at the tomb door. He can, when once he find his way, come out from anything, or into anything, no matter how close it be bound or even fused up with the fire. Solder, you call it. He can see in the dark. No small power these, in a world which is one half shut from the light. Ah, but hear me though, he can do all these things, yet he is not free. Nay, he is even more prisoner than the slave of the galley, than the madman in his cell. He cannot go where he lists. He who is not of nature has yet to obey some of nature's laws, why we know not. He may not enter anywhere at the first, unless there may be some of the household who bid him to come, though afterwards he can come as he please. His power ceases, as does that of all evil things at the coming of the day. Only at certain times can he have limited freedom. If he be not at the place whither he is bound, he can only change himself at noon, or at exact sunrise or sunset. These things we are told, and in this record of ours we have proof by inference. Thus, whereas he can do as he will within his limit, when he have his earth home, his coffin home, his hell home, the place unhallowed, it is said too that he can only pass running water at the slack or the flood of the tide. Then there are things which so afflict him that he has no power, as the garlic that we know of, and as for things sacred, as his symbol, my crucifix, that was amongst us even now when we resolve. To them he is nothing, but in their presence he takes his place far off and silent with respect. There are others too which I shall tell you of, lest in our seeking we may need them. The branch of wild rose on his coffin keep him, that he may not move from it. A sacred bullet fired into the coffin kill him, so that he be true dead. And as for the stake through him, we know already of its peace, or the cut-off head that give it rest. We have seen it with our eyes. Thus, when we find the habitation of this man that was, we can confine him to his coffin and destroy him, if we obey what we know.
Destroy every box, sterilize the earth inside, leave him no refuge. Let the exorcism begin.
After securing Mina at Dr. Seward's asylum, the 5 men visit Dracula's abbey to sterilize his earth-filled crates, destroying his resting place. Seeing them from above, the furious Dracula decides to visit Renfield and kill him, believing that he'd betrayed him. He then creeps into the room of Mina with the intention of turning her into his bride, but despite her yearning to join him, he ultimately stops, stating that he loved her too much to condemn her to such a twisted fate. Having destroyed the London base, the men enter the room to kill Dracula, who transforms into a man-bat before changing into hundreds of rats and scurrying away. Here I think it's important to note that Mina and Dracula's romantic relationship is not featured in Bram Stoker's novel. He does feed on her before fleeing back home, but it's out of spite and to regain his strength rather than out of love. In the novel, when they discover that Dracula is retreating back to Transylvania, Van Helsing implores him not to stop, to pursue him and make sure that Dracula does not return home and simply wait for those that know of him to die. He have long since conceived the idea of coming to a great city. What does he do? He find out the place of all the world most of promise for him. Then he deliberately set himself down to prepare for the task. He find in patience just how is his strength and what are his powers. He study new tongues, he learn new social life, new environment of old ways, the politics, the law, the finance, the science, the habit of new land and a new people who have come to be since he was. He have done this alone, all alone, from a ruined tomb in a forgotten land. What more may he not do when the greater world of thought is open to him? He that can smile at death as we know him, who can flourish in the midst of diseases that kill off whole peoples. Oh, if such an one was to come from God and not the devil, what a force for good might he not be in this old world of ours? But we are pledged to set the world free. Our toil must be in silence, and our efforts all in secret. For in this enlightened age, when men believe not even what they see, the doubting of wise men would be his greatest strength. It would be at once his sheath and his armor, his weapons to destroy us, his enemies, who are willing to peril even our own souls for the safeties of one we love, for the good of mankind, and for the honor and glory of God.
Holmwood received a wire. The Count's ship sailed past us in the night fog to the northern port of Galat. The Black Devil is reading Mina's mind.
Exploiting Dracula's mind contact with Mina, Van Helsing is able to determine his plan, but Dracula also seems to know theirs, and instead of sailing to Varna, Dracula diverts his ship 200 miles north and lands at Galatz. And so Van Helsing and Mina take a carriage directly from Varna to the Borgo Pass, while Jonathan, Quincy, Arthur and Jack continue by train to Galatz, where they secure horses and ride for the Borgo Pass, hoping to intercept the Count. Unfortunately, they're unsuccessful and learn that Dracula's gypsies picked up his box at Galatz and began speeding down the Borgo Pass. As they get near the castle, Mina and Van Helsing are beset by taunting spirits, causing the vampire hunter to cast a circle of fire around them, before protecting Mina by burning her forehead with a Blessed Communion wafer. The spirits soon reveal themselves to be Dracula's 3 brides, who tempt Mina to join them, before killing the horses from their carriage out of frustration. Of course, the next morning, as Mina sleeps in the circle, Van Helsing visits the castle and beheads the brides, throwing their severed heads into the gorge before calling out Dracula's name in jest like a Giga Chad. As the sun begins coming down, the gypsy wagon bearing Dracula approaches the castle, with Jonathan, Arthur, Quincy, and Jack closely behind. Betraying the group, Mina calls up a blue flame to protect Dracula. As the gypsy wagon enters the courtyard, a gypsy then stabs Quincy in the back. Jonathan then tries to open Dracula's box, but with the sun having set, Dracula beats him to it. But before the Count can put his renewed strength into action, Jonathan slits his neck and Quincy stabs Dracula through the heart with a sword as Mina screams. Quincy then dies as Mina sits with Dracula on the chapel floor inside the castle. When he begs her to give him peace, she ultimately pushes the sword all the way through his heart and cuts off his head. Not only does the burn on her forehead disappear, but the wound on the altar cross repairs itself, and as Dracula dies, his body returns to how it was when he renounced God, implying that he'd been finally forgiven. With that said, that's all for today, folks. A huge thanks to everyone that voted we cover Bram Stoker's Dracula. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe to stay up to date on all my content, and if there's anything else you'd like to request, please don't hesitate to ask. As always, it's been a pleasure. Niyat here with Film Comics Explained. Thanks for stopping by.
You think you can destroy me with your eyes?